Marcus Chen adjusted his grip on the small device strapped to his thigh, trying to ignore the rumbling laughter that echoed through the massive hangar bay of the Zephyrian trade station. The sound wasn't quite laughter as humans understood it, but the universal translator did its best to convey the mixture of amusement and condescension rolling off the gathered aliens in waves. That's supposed to be a weapon? The voice belonged to Corax, a 7-foot-tall Valdorian whose chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the artificial lighting. His 4 arms gestured dismissively at Marcus's sidearm, each movement causing the ceremonial battle scarring on his carapace to catch the light. Our younglings carry more impressive toys. The crowd of alien dignitaries, traders, and military officials pressed closer, their various forms creating a bizarre menagerie of evolutionary paths. There were the crystalline Nexari, whose bodies chimed like wind instruments when they moved. The serpentine Thessian delegation swayed their elongated necks to get a better view, their scaled skin shifting colors with what Marcus had learned indicated amusement. Even the usually stoic Morthak representatives, massive bear-like creatures whose homeworld boasted gravity 3 times that of Earth, were making the deep, rumbling sounds that served as their equivalent of chuckling. Marcus stood at the center of it all, feeling every inch the primitive representative of a backwater species that had only recently achieved faster-than-light travel, the Galactic Trade Confederation's first human delegate, they called him. What they really meant was the first human foolish enough to think his species belonged among the stars. Perhaps, interjected Ambassador Ilith of the Nexari Coalition, her crystalline form refracting the hangar's lights into dancing rainbows, the human could explain the principle behind this diminutive armament? The word diminutive resonated through her crystal matrix with what sounded like barely contained mirth. Marcus had been expecting this moment since the Confederation's Weapons Assessment Committee had requested a demonstration of human military technology. Earth's governments had debated for months about what to show these advanced civilizations. The aliens had casually mentioned that this was standard procedure for all new species seeking full membership, a simple display of defensive capabilities to ensure the newcomers could contribute meaningfully to collective security. What Earth's leaders hadn't realized was that this simple display was essentially a cosmic measuring contest, and humanity was showing up with what appeared to be a toy. The weapon in question was a standard-issue M47 plasma pistol, considered cutting-edge by Earth's military, but apparently laughable by galactic standards. It measured barely 8 inches from grip to muzzle, weighed less than 2 pounds, and looked more like a sleek electronics device than an instrument of war. Compared to the massive energy cannons, molecular disruptors, and quantum field generators that other species had demonstrated over the past week, it might as well have been a pointed stick. The operating principle is relatively straightforward, Marcus began, his voice steady despite the growing murmur of alien amusement. Contain plasma discharge, focused through magnetic field manipulation, with an effective range of approximately 200 meters. Corax's mandibles clicked together in what Marcus had learned was the Valdorian equivalent of a snort. 200 meters? Our sidearms are effective at over 10,000. And plasma? He gestured to one of his subordinates, who hefted a weapon that looked more like a small cannon. We abandoned such primitive technology centuries ago in favor of subatomic manipulation. The Thessian delegate, a sleek female whose name Marcus recalled as Sestheta, raised her elegant head higher. Forgive the inquiry, human Marcus, but surely your species possesses more substantial armaments? What you display seems suitable perhaps for hunting small prey? Marcus felt his jaw tighten. 3 days of this. 3 days of condescending questions, barely disguised insults, and the growing certainty that humanity's application for Confederation membership was going to be rejected before it even reached the formal review stage. Every species that had demonstrated their weapons had produced marvels of destruction that could level mountains or vaporize starships. The Korthak had shown a rifle that could punch holes through the station's outer hull, if not for the emergency force fields that had automatically engaged. The Valdorians had brought a squad-level weapon that had literally disintegrated a target at the molecular level, reducing a ton of synthetic material to its component atoms in seconds. And here he was, representing Earth's finest military technology with what amounted to a fancy energy pistol. "This is our standard sidearm," Marcus replied carefully. "Our primary weapon systems are, naturally, much more substantial. However, the committee specifically requested a demonstration of personal defense weapons." "Of course," rumbled General Thax of the Morthak Legion, his massive form shifting with what might have been boredom. "But surely you understand our confusion. Your defense weapon appears to be quaint. No offense intended, human Marcus." The universal translator helpfully provided emotional context for the general's words, indicating that considerable offense was, in fact, intended. Marcus looked around the assembled crowd, noting how their initial curiosity had shifted to barely concealed dismissal. The past week had been an endless parade of technological one-upmanship, each species attempting to outdo the others with increasingly impressive displays of destructive capability. The humans had requested to go last, hoping to learn from the other demonstrations. Now Marcus was beginning to suspect that had been a mistake. The testing facility itself was impressive enough to make Marcus feel small. The hangar bay stretched for nearly a kilometer in each direction, its ceiling lost in the distance above. Force field generators created a safe viewing area for the delegates, while the far end of the space had been configured as a testing range. Targets of various materials and configurations waited in the distance. Steel plates, energy-resistant ceramics, even samples of the ultra-hard neutronium composites that some species used for armor. Previous demonstrations had been spectacular. The Nexari had shown a weapon that manipulated gravity itself, crushing targets under their own weight until they collapsed into microscopic singularities. The Korthak energy cannon had simply erased its targets from existence, leaving behind not even atomic residue. One particularly memorable display had involved a Thessian weapon that somehow convinced matter at the quantum level to stop existing, creating perfect spheres of absolute nothingness in the target area. And now Marcus was supposed to impress this crowd with a plasma pistol. "Shall we proceed with the demonstration?" Ambassador Ilith's crystalline voice carried across the space, her tone making it clear that she expected this to be brief and disappointing. Marcus stepped forward, moving toward the firing line. The weapon felt familiar and reassuring in his hand, despite the circumstances. He'd carried variants of this design through 3 combat deployments, had trained with it for over a decade. It was reliable, accurate, and had never failed him when his life depended on it. Of course, he'd never needed to use it to impress aliens who could casually manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe. "The target?" Marcus asked, scanning the array of materials set up downrange. "Perhaps the basic steel plate?" suggested Korax, his tone making it clear he considered this a waste of everyone's time. "Something appropriate for your equipment." The steel plate in question was a standard testing material, about 3 feet square and 6 inches thick. Previous weapons had either vaporized it completely or punched through it so cleanly that the hole looked machine-drilled. Marcus suspected his plasma bolt would leave a respectable scorch mark and maybe punch through a few inches of the material. He raised the weapon, feeling the familiar weight and balance. The targeting system synced with his neural implant, providing range and trajectory data that overlaid his vision in soft blue highlights. 200 meters to target. Environmental factors minimal. Plasma chamber at full charge. "Interesting," observed Esses Theta. "The human appears to be using some form of integrated targeting system. How? Primitive, yet practical." Marcus ignored the comment and focused on his breathing. Steady, controlled, exactly as he'd been trained. The weapon's charge indicator showed full capacity, the magnetic containment fields stable and ready. He could feel the attention of every alien in the hangar focused on him, waiting for what they clearly expected to be a disappointing conclusion to the week's demonstrations. The plasma pistol had been developed during Earth's colonial expansion, when human settlements on distant worlds needed reliable, maintenance-friendly weapons that could function in hostile environments. It wasn't the most powerful weapon in humanity's arsenal, but it was versatile, dependable, and had seen action on over 100 worlds. More importantly, it incorporated a feature that Earth's military had never bothered to mention in their technical specifications. Marcus squeezed the trigger. The weapon fired with its characteristic whine, a sound like tearing silk amplified through electronic filters. A bolt of contained plasma, glowing white-hot, streaked across the hangar toward the target. The aliens watched with the polite attention of beings observing a child's school project. The bolt struck the steel plate, and immediately, Marcus heard the first surprised sounds from the crowd. Instead of the expected scorch mark or small puncture, the plasma had punched completely through the 6-inch steel plate, leaving edges that glowed cherry red with residual heat. Rumbled General Thax. More effective than anticipated. The projectile appears to have... He never finished the sentence. The plasma bolt, having passed cleanly through the steel plate, struck the neutronium composite target behind it. This was material so dense and durable that previous demonstrations had either failed to damage it at all or barely scratched its surface. The Korthak disintegrator beam had left a mark no deeper than a pencil point. The plasma bolt punched through the neutronium like it was paper. Behind the neutronium target was a series of progressively more exotic materials, each designed to test the limits of advanced weapons technology. Quantum-locked ceramics that existed in a state of structural impossibility. Crystallized space-time that the Nexari had provided from their homeworld's core. Metamaterials that technically shouldn't exist according to several species' understanding of physics. The plasma bolt went through all of them. The crowd had gone completely silent now, their various forms of amusement dying away as they watched the impossible unfold. The bolt should have dissipated after the first few impacts, its contained energy bleeding away until it was nothing more than hot gas. Instead, it seemed to be gaining intensity, burning brighter and moving faster with each target it destroyed. Marcus watched calmly as his shot continued downrange, punching through barrier after barrier with casual indifference to their supposed durability. The targeting system tracked its progress, feeding him real-time data on velocity, temperature, and structural integrity. All readings were holding steady, exactly as designed. The plasma bolt reached the far end of the testing range and struck the hangar's rear wall, a wall that was constructed from the same ultra-dense materials used in starship hulls and was theoretically capable of withstanding direct hits from most weapon systems. There was a flash of light so intense that the hangar's automatic dimming systems engaged, protecting everyone's vision from permanent damage. When the glare faded, a perfectly circular hole stretched from the testing range through the hangar wall and presumably beyond, its edges still glowing with residual energy. Emergency alarms began to sound as the station's automated systems detected a hull breach. Force fields snapped into place, sealing the hole and maintaining atmospheric pressure, but not before a rush of escaping air had rattled loose equipment throughout the hangar. In the sudden silence that followed, Marcus calmly holstered his weapon and turned back to face the assembly of alien delegates. Every single being in the hangar was staring at him with expressions that ranged from shock to outright terror. "I believe," Marcus said quietly, "that concludes the demonstration." Ambassador Eilith's crystalline form had gone completely transparent, a sign of extreme distress among her species. When she finally spoke, her voice resonated with harmonics that the translator couldn't quite process. "How? What? That is impossible." No handheld weapon should possess such capability. Corax's 4 arms were held rigidly at his sides, his entire posture radiating the kind of tension that preceded either fight or flight responses. What manner of technology are you concealing from us, human? That weapon defies every principle of energy dynamics known to galactic science. Marcus considered his response carefully. The truth was both simpler and more complex than they could imagine, and he wasn't sure they were ready to hear it. The weapon operates exactly as I described, he said finally. Contained plasma discharge. Magnetically focused. Nothing more complicated than that. Impossible, hissed Theta, her neck coiled tight with agitation. We observed your plasma bolt penetrating materials that should have absorbed or deflected such energy within microseconds. The neutronium alone should have stopped it, Marcus agreed. According to your understanding of physics. The implications of that statement hung in the air like an unexploded bomb. Around the hangar, alien delegates were conferring in urgent whispers, their various communication methods creating a cacophony of clicks, chimes, hisses, and harmonic resonances. General Thax stepped forward, his massive form seeming somehow less impressive than it had moments before. Human Marcus, I must ask directly, what is the nature of your species' weapon technology? The demonstration we have witnessed suggests capabilities that exceed our collective understanding. Marcus looked at the general, then at the assembled crowd of beings who had spent the week treating humanity like an amusing curiosity. He thought about the condescending laughter, the barely disguised insults, the assumption that Earth's inhabitants were primitive creatures who might be useful for manual labor but could never contribute meaningfully to galactic civilization. I'm afraid, Marcus said, allowing just a hint of the steel he'd learned in 3 combat deployments to enter his voice. That information is classified. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the station's ambient systems seemed to have quieted, as if the entire structure was holding its breath. Ambassador Eilith was the first to break the silence, her crystalline form slowly regaining some of its color as she processed the implications of Marcus's words. Classified. You mean to say that this weapon represents a lesser example of your species' capabilities? Marcus smiled, and there was nothing friendly about the expression. This is a sidearm, Ambassador. Standard issue for our military personnel. I'd hate for anyone to think we were showing off. The effect of his words on the assembled aliens was immediate and dramatic. Corax's mandibles began clicking rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. The Thessian delegates coiled their necks even tighter, their scales shifting to warning colors that made them look like living rainbows of alarm. The Morthak general's fur was standing on end, making his already massive form appear even larger. But it was Ambassador Eilith's reaction that Marcus found most interesting. Her crystalline body had begun to resonate at a frequency that created a low harmonic tone, something he'd never heard before, but which the universal translator identified as profound concern mixed with what could only be described as respect. I believe, she said finally, her voice carrying none of its earlier condescension, that the Confederation Council needs to convene an emergency session to discuss humanity's membership application. Marcus nodded politely. Of course. Earth looks forward to the Council's decision. As he turned to leave the testing area, he could hear the urgent conversations breaking out behind him. Alien languages mixed and overlapped as delegates tried to process what they had witnessed and its implications for their understanding of this new species that had seemed so primitive just moments before. Walking through the hangar toward the exit, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The weapon at his side felt no different than it had an hour ago. Familiar, reliable, reassuring. The aliens would spend weeks trying to understand what they had seen, developing theories and conducting tests to explain the impossible. They would never figure it out because they were approaching the problem from the wrong direction entirely. They assumed that any sufficiently advanced technology would be complex, exotic, requiring mastery of forces and principles that pushed the boundaries of scientific understanding. Humans had taken a different approach entirely. Sometimes, Marcus reflected as he headed back to his quarters, the most devastating innovations came not from adding complexity, but from perfecting simplicity in ways that others never considered possible. The emergency council session was called for 6 hours after the weapons demonstration, but Marcus knew the real discussions had begun the moment he'd left the hangar. His quarters were located in the diplomatic section of the trade station, and the constant stream of alien visitors hurrying through the corridors told him everything he needed to know about the level of concern his little display had generated. He was reviewing Earth's classified technical briefings when his door chimed. The visitor was unexpected. Dr. Zara Okafor, Earth's chief scientific advisor and the only other human currently aboard the station. Her dark face was creased with worry as she entered his quarters. "Marcus, what the hell did you just do out there?" she demanded without preamble. "My communication array has been lighting up with messages from Earth Command for the past 3 hours. Half the governments back home are screaming for explanations, and the other half are asking if we need immediate military backup." Marcus gestured for her to sit, noting the tension in her posture. Dr. Okafor had been against this entire diplomatic mission from the beginning, arguing that humanity wasn't ready for galactic politics. Recent events were probably feeling like vindication of her position. "I followed our instructions exactly," Marcus replied calmly. "The Weapons Assessment Committee requested a demonstration of personal defense technology. I provided one." "You put a hole through 3 kilometers of the station's superstructure." Zara's voice was climbing toward panic. "The engineering teams are still trying to figure out how to properly seal the breach. That plasma bolt exited the station and continued for another 7 kilometers before finally dissipating in open space." Marcus raised an eyebrow. 7 kilometers? That's actually shorter than our test results indicated. The station's hull must have provided more resistance than expected. Zara stared at him in disbelief. "You're talking about this like it was a routine training exercise. Marcus, do you understand what you've done? Every species on this station is now convinced that humanity is either hiding military technology that makes them look like children playing with sticks, or that we've somehow achieved something that violates their understanding of fundamental physics. Both assessments are essentially correct," Marcus said mildly. The silence that followed was long and heavy. Dr. Okafor had spent her career studying alien technology, trying to understand how humanity could close the technological gap that seemed to separate Earth from the established galactic civilizations. She had devoted years to analyzing captured alien devices, reverse engineering their principles, and developing human equivalents that could at least approach alien capabilities. "Explain," she said finally. Marcus stood and moved to his quarters' small viewport, looking out at the stars that surrounded the trade station. Somewhere out there, dozens of alien civilizations were going about their daily business, secure in their technological superiority and their understanding of how the universe worked. In a few hours, that security was going to be challenged in ways they couldn't imagine. "The weapon I used today is exactly what I told them it was," Marcus began. "A plasma discharge system magnetically contained and focused. The technology is no more advanced than what any of them could build, and in some ways it's considerably more primitive." "Then how—" "The difference," Marcus continued, "isn't in the technology. It's in the philosophy behind it." He turned back to face Dr. Okafor, noting the frustrated confusion on her face. She was brilliant, one of Earth's foremost experts on both human and alien physics, but like most scientists, she was approaching this problem from the wrong direction. "Every species we've encountered approaches weapons technology the same way," Marcus explained. More energy, more exotic materials, more complex manipulation of physical laws. They build weapons that push the boundaries of what's possible, that require massive power sources and sophisticated manufacturing techniques. The Nexari gravity manipulators need crystalline matrices that can only be grown in zero-gravity environments over decades. The Valdorian molecular disruptors require particle accelerators the size of city blocks. The Korthak erasure beams consume more energy in a single shot than most civilizations generate in a year. Zara nodded slowly. And our approach is different. How? Marcus smiled, but there was something cold in the expression. We don't try to push the boundaries of what's possible. We perfect what's practical. The M47 plasma pistol doesn't use more energy than an alien weapon. It uses energy more efficiently. It doesn't manipulate exotic matter. It manipulates ordinary matter in ways that other species never considered. I don't understand. Marcus moved to his personal equipment case and withdrew another M47, identical to the one he'd used in the demonstration. He held it up, letting Dr. Okafor examine the weapon's simple, utilitarian design. This weapon doesn't generate plasma, he said quietly. It doesn't contain plasma. It doesn't manipulate plasma. It creates plasma from the materials it encounters. Dr. Okafor's eyes widened as the implications began to sink in. Cascade reaction? Cascade reaction, Marcus confirmed. The initial energy discharge doesn't need to penetrate the target, it just needs to make contact. Once it does, the magnetic field matrix we've developed converts the target material itself into additional plasma, which feeds back into the system and increases the bolt's energy density. But that's... Zara's voice trailed off as her scientific training wrestled with the concept. That's impossible. You can't maintain containment on a cascade reaction over extended distances. The magnetic field matrix would collapse within microseconds. It would, Marcus agreed, if we were trying to maintain containment the way everyone else does. But we're not containing the plasma in the traditional sense. We're teaching it to contain itself. The explanation took another 20 minutes, during which Dr. Okafor's expression shifted from confusion to amazement to something approaching terror. The M47 plasma pistol was, as Marcus had claimed, a relatively simple weapon. But its simplicity was deceptive, masking innovations in field dynamics, material science, and energy manipulation that represented decades of uniquely human research. Other species had developed more powerful weapons by brute force, applying massive amounts of energy or exotic materials to achieve devastating effects. Humans had achieved similar results through elegance, creating weapons that used their target's own mass and molecular structure against them. The stronger and more durable the target, the more energy the cascade reaction could generate. My God, Zara whispered finally. Do you realize what this means? If the aliens understand what we've done, they'll want to know how we did it, Marcus finished. And more importantly, they'll want to know what else we've developed using similar principles. As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus's communication system chimed with an incoming priority message. The sender was Ambassador Eilith, and her crystalline face on the display showed none of the condescension that had characterized their earlier interactions. Human Marcus, she began without preamble, the Confederation Council has concluded its preliminary assessment of today's demonstration. We would like to schedule an immediate private conference to discuss certain technical specifications related to your species' defensive capabilities. Marcus exchanged a look with Dr. Okafor before responding. Of course, Ambassador. I'm available at your convenience. Excellent. We will convene in Conference Room 7 in 1 hour. Please be advised that this session will be attended by senior military representatives from all major Confederation species, as well as our most experienced weapons analysis specialists. The connection terminated, leaving Marcus and Zara alone with the weight of what was about to unfold. "They're scared," Zara observed, her voice barely above a whisper. "They should be," Marcus replied. The conference room was unlike anything Marcus had seen during his stay on the trade station. Instead of the open, airy spaces that most alien species seem to prefer, this was clearly a secure briefing facility designed for sensitive discussions. The walls were lined with what appeared to be signal-dampening materials, and the entire space existed within multiple layers of privacy shields and interference generators. The assembled aliens represented the military and scientific elite of the Galactic Confederation, but their body language told a story of beings who had been profoundly unsettled by recent events. General Thax of the Morthak Legion sat rigidly upright, his massive form radiating tension. Corax was flanked by two other Valdorian officers, their mandibles clicking in what Marcus now recognized as subdued conversation. The Nexari delegation had arranged themselves in a perfect crystalline formation that somehow managed to look defensive despite their geometric precision. Ambassador Elith called the session to order with a harmonic tone that resonated through the conference room's specialized acoustic systems. When she spoke, her crystalline form had taken on the deep blue coloration that indicated formal diplomatic protocol. "Human Marcus, this council has reviewed the technical data from your weapons demonstration. Our analysis indicates that your plasma discharge system achieved effects that our current scientific models cannot adequately explain." Marcus nodded politely. "I'm happy to address any specific questions the council might have." "Indeed." General Thax leaned forward, his deep voice carrying undertones that the universal translator identified as barely controlled aggression. "Our primary concern relates to the energy density your weapon achieved during sustained operation. Our measurements indicate that your plasma bolt actually gained energy as it traveled, rather than losing coherence as conventional physics would predict." "That's correct." The simple confirmation sent a visible ripple of reaction through the assembled aliens. Corax's mandibles began their rapid clicking again, while the Thessian representative's scales shifted to warning colors. "How?" Ambassador Wylith's question carried a harmonic edge that suggested she was operating at the very limits of diplomatic protocol. Marcus considered his response carefully. The truth would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the galaxy, potentially destabilizing alliances that had existed for centuries. But lying wasn't really an option. The aliens had sensor data that would allow them to work backward from the observed effects, even if it took them decades to understand the underlying principles. "Our weapons technology is based on a different understanding of energy conservation," he said finally. "Rather than viewing each shot as a discrete energy expenditure, we've developed systems that treat targets as additional fuel sources." The conference room erupted in a cacophony of alien voices as representatives from different species tried to process this information. Marcus waited patiently for the noise to die down, noting how each species' reaction reflected their particular approach to technology and warfare. Dr. Zenth, the Nexari's chief scientific advisor, was the first to regain composure. Her crystalline form had shifted to a deep purple that Marcus's cultural briefings identified as intense intellectual curiosity mixed with fear. "You speak of targets as fuel sources," she said, her harmonic voice creating complex overtones in the conference room's acoustics. "This suggests a form of matter conversion that our science indicates should be impossible at the energy levels your weapon operates with." "Your science is correct," Marcus agreed. "Matter conversion at those energy levels is impossible. That's why we don't convert matter. We convince it to convert itself." The explanation that followed was carefully edited, revealing enough to satisfy the aliens' immediate questions without providing the technical details they would need to replicate human weapons technology. Marcus described the basic principles of cascade reaction dynamics, the methods humans had developed for manipulating molecular stability at a distance, and the philosophical approach that had led to these innovations. What he didn't explain was how human researchers had achieved these breakthroughs, the specific materials and manufacturing techniques required, or the broader implications of the technology for other applications. By the time he finished, the conference room had fallen into a silence so complete that the ambient hum of the station's environmental systems seemed deafening by comparison. Ambassador Eilith was the first to speak, her crystalline form now displaying the deep red coloration that indicated extreme concern. Human Marcus, the technology you describe represents a fundamental paradigm shift in our understanding of weapons science. If your species has developed similar innovations in other areas, she didn't need to finish the thought. Every being in the room understood the implications. If humans could achieve such devastating effects with personal weapons by working smarter rather than harder, what had they accomplished with their larger military systems? Their starships? Their planetary defense networks? "I'm not authorized to discuss other military applications," Marcus said diplomatically. General Thax's fur was standing completely on end now, making his already impressive bulk appear enormous. "Human Marcus, I must ask directly, does your species represent a military threat to Confederation security?" The question hung in the air like a live explosive, and Marcus knew that his answer would determine not just humanity's relationship with the Confederation, but potentially the future stability of the entire galaxy. He looked around the room at the assembled aliens, beings whose species had spent centuries or millennia developing their civilizations, building their technologies, establishing their place in the galactic order. They had created weapons of incredible sophistication and power, mastered forces that could reshape planets, built technologies that seemed like magic to less advanced species. And now they were afraid of a human with a pistol. "General Thax," Marcus said carefully, "Earth's interest is in peaceful cooperation and mutual benefit. We seek membership in the Confederation because we believe that working together, all of our species can achieve more than any of us could accomplish alone." It was a diplomatic non-answer, and everyone in the room knew it, but it was also the truth as far as it went. What Marcus didn't say was that humanity had learned to be very careful about how they defined peaceful cooperation and mutual benefit. Earth had spent centuries dealing with species that talked about cooperation while preparing for conquest, neighbors who spoke of mutual benefit while planning exploitation. The galaxy, it seemed, wasn't much different from Earth in that regard. Ambassador Eilith's crystalline form began to resonate at frequencies that created complex harmonies throughout the conference room. When she spoke, her voice carried overtones that the universal translator identified as formal diplomatic conclusion mixed with profound uncertainty. "The Confederation Council will need time to fully process the implications of today's revelations," she announced. "Human Marcus, your species membership application will be expedited and given the highest priority consideration." Marcus nodded politely. "Earth appreciates the Council's diligence." As the session concluded and the alien delegates began to file out, Marcus could hear fragments of urgent conversations in dozens of different languages. The Morthak were discussing immediate military protocols. The Valdorians were debating intelligence gathering operations. The Nexari were analyzing the physics implications with their characteristic obsessive precision. All of them were trying to figure out how to respond to a species that had just casually demonstrated the ability to make their most advanced defensive technologies irrelevant. Walking back to his quarters, Marcus reflected on the day's events. The weapons demonstration had gone exactly according to plan. Earth Command had known precisely what effect it would have on the alien observers. The follow-up briefing had also proceeded as expected, revealing just enough information to establish humanity's technological credibility without compromising operational security. Now came the hard part, navigating the political and military consequences of having introduced a paradigm-shifting technology to a galaxy that thought it understood the rules of warfare. Marcus suspected that the next few days were going to be very interesting indeed. The summons came at dawn, station time. Though on a structure that orbited a binary star system, the concept of dawn was more theoretical than practical. Marcus had been expecting it. 3 days of increasingly frantic alien conferences, emergency military briefings, and what his monitoring systems politely described as intensive intelligence-gathering activities had made it clear that the Confederation was struggling to process the implications of humanity's unexpected technological capabilities. Dr. Okafor was waiting for him in the diplomatic section's main corridor, her expression grim. "They want both of us this time," she said without preamble. "Full council session, all member species represented. This isn't just about membership anymore, Marcus. They're treating this like a potential security crisis." Marcus adjusted his formal diplomatic attire, noting the weight of the M47 at his side. He'd continued carrying the weapon throughout his stay on the station, partly for security, partly because it had become a symbol of humanity's unexpected capabilities. The aliens had stopped commenting on it after the demonstration, but he'd noticed how their gazes lingered on the seemingly innocuous device. "Any word from Earth Command?" he asked. "Regular check-in scheduled for this afternoon," Zara replied. "But I've been monitoring long-range communications. There's a lot of encrypted traffic moving between the major Confederation worlds. Whatever they've decided, it's big enough to involve their home governments." The main council chamber was unlike anything Marcus had seen during his time on the station. The circular space was enormous, with tiered seating that rose toward a domed ceiling that displayed a real-time view of the surrounding star system. Representatives from over 40 different species filled the chamber, creating a symphony of alien voices, bioluminescent displays, and pheromone communications that the station's translation systems struggled to process. At the chamber's center, a raised platform held seats for the Confederation's senior leadership. Ambassador Eilith occupied the primary position, her crystalline form now displaying the deep gold coloration that indicated formal governmental authority. Flanking her were General Thax, Corax of the Valdorian Military Command, and representatives from the other major powers. As Marcus and Dr. Okafor entered the chamber, the alien conversations gradually died away until only the ambient hum of life support systems could be heard. Hundreds of alien eyes, optical sensors, and bioluminescent organs focused on the two humans with an intensity that was almost physical. Ambassador Eilith's voice resonated through the chamber's acoustic systems with harmonic frequencies that commanded absolute attention. "Representatives of the human species, this council has completed its assessment of your membership application and the additional information that has come to light during your stay." Marcus remained standing at attention, his diplomatic training keeping his expression neutral, despite the tension radiating from every alien in the chamber. "However," Eilith continued, "before we announce our decision, this council requires clarification on several matters of critical importance to Confederation security." General Thax rose from his position, his massive Morthak frame dominating the platform, even among the other large species present. When he spoke, his deep voice carried undertones that the universal translator identified as barely controlled aggression mixed with professional respect. "Human Marcus, our intelligence services have spent the past 72 hours analyzing every piece of technical data we possess regarding your species' capabilities. The results are concerning." A holographic display materialized above the chamber's center, showing technical schematics and energy analysis charts. Marcus recognized them as detailed breakdowns of his weapons demonstration, complete with mathematical models attempting to explain the observed effects. "Our scientists have concluded that the technology you demonstrated represents not an anomaly, but rather an example of a completely different approach to applied physics," Thax continued. This leads us to an inevitable question. If this represents your standard approach to weapons development, what other capabilities has your species developed using similar principles? The question Marcus had been expecting for 3 days had finally arrived. Around the chamber, alien representatives leaned forward in their various ways, crystalline forms refracting light patterns, serpentine necks extending for better views, insectoid compound eyes focusing with mechanical precision. "General Thax," Marcus replied formally, "I'm authorized to share information about human defensive capabilities as they relate to our potential membership in the Confederation. However, detailed technical specifications remain classified pending formal diplomatic agreements." "Diplomatic agreements," rumbled Corax, his mandibles clicking with what Marcus now recognized as controlled frustration. "Human Marcus, you must understand our position. Your demonstration has revealed that our assumptions about the technological balance within the galaxy may be fundamentally incorrect. We require assurance that humanity's innovations do not represent a threat to existing Confederation security." Dr. Okafor stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of Earth's scientific establishment. "If I may address the Council's concerns from a technical perspective?" Ambassador Wylith's crystalline form shifted to indicate permission, and Zara activated her personal presentation system. New holographic displays joined the existing ones, showing comparative analyses and theoretical frameworks that she had been developing since the weapons demonstration. The technology demonstrated by Ambassador Chen represents what human science refers to as efficiency optimization, she began. Rather than increasing energy input to achieve greater effects, we focus on maximizing the useful output from any given energy investment. She gestured to the displays, highlighting key differences between human and alien approaches. Your species have developed impressive capabilities through what we might call brute force innovation, applying increasingly powerful forces to achieve desired effects. Humans have achieved similar results through what we term elegant integration, finding ways to make existing forces work more effectively. The explanation that followed was masterful, revealing the philosophical differences that had led to humanity's unique technological development without compromising any specific technical details. Dr. Okafor described human approaches to materials, science, energy management, and system integration that had evolved from Earth's resource constraints and competitive pressures. The key insight, she concluded, is that apparent technological superiority often masks fundamental inefficiencies. By optimizing for efficiency rather than raw power, humans have developed systems that can achieve exceptional results using relatively modest resources. When she finished, the chamber fell into a silence that stretched for several minutes. Marcus watched the alien representatives processing this information, noting how different species reacted according to their cultural and technological backgrounds. Finally, Ambassador Illith spoke, her harmonic voice carrying overtones of grudging respect mixed with continuing concern. "Dr. Okafor, your explanation addresses our technical questions, but raises additional concerns about strategic implications. If human efficiency optimization can achieve such dramatic results in weapons technology, what applications has your species developed for spacecraft, manufacturing, or planetary infrastructure?" Dr. Okafor exchanged a look with Marcus before responding. "I'm not authorized to discuss specific applications beyond defensive systems. However, I can say that human engineering philosophy tends to be comprehensive." The implications of that simple statement rippled through the chamber like a shockwave. If humans applied their efficiency optimization to all technological challenges, then every assumption the Confederation held about relative capabilities might be wrong. Corax was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. "Are you suggesting that humanity's technological capabilities across all sectors may significantly exceed our current estimates?" Marcus decided it was time to take control of the conversation. "What we're suggesting," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority he'd learned in 3 combat deployments, "is that Earth approaches technology development differently than the species we've encountered. Whether that translates to superior capabilities is a question that may not have a simple answer." He paused, letting that sink in before continuing. "However, I can say that Earth's interest in Confederation membership is genuine. We believe that cooperation benefits everyone involved. We're not seeking to replace existing power structures or challenge established authorities. We're offering to contribute our unique perspective to collective challenges." General Thax's fur bristled as he leaned forward. "And if the Confederation were to decline your membership application? If we were to determine that humanity's technological capabilities represent an unacceptable security risk?" The chamber went dead silent. Marcus felt the weight of hundreds of alien gazes focused on him, waiting for his response to what was essentially a threat. His hand didn't move toward his weapon, but he didn't need to. Every being in the chamber was acutely aware of the small device that had punched through 3 kilometers of the station's superstructure. "General," Marcus replied quietly, "I believe that would be an unfortunate decision for everyone involved." The words were mild, but their implications were crystal clear. Earth had demonstrated that human weapons could penetrate any known defensive technology. The logical conclusion was that human spacecraft, manufacturing capabilities, and military systems might be equally advanced. Rejecting humanity's peaceful overtures might force a much less pleasant first contact scenario. The silence that followed stretched until it became almost unbearable. Finally, Ambassador Ilith's crystalline form began to resonate at frequencies that created complex harmonics throughout the chamber. "The Confederation Council will recess for final deliberations," she announced. "Representatives of humanity, please remain available for immediate recall." As the chamber emptied, Marcus and Dr. Okafor found themselves alone in the vast space. The holographic displays had been deactivated, leaving only the view of the binary star system turning slowly overhead. "Think we pushed too hard?" Zara asked quietly. Marcus considered the question, reviewing the past hour's conversation and the aliens' reactions. No, they needed to understand the situation clearly. Pretending to be less capable than we are would have led to bigger problems down the road. And if they decide we're too dangerous to admit to the Confederation? Marcus looked up at the stars visible through the chamber's dome, thinking about the human colony ships that were already spreading throughout the galaxy, the research stations developing even more efficient technologies, the defensive platforms that protected Earth and its growing sphere of influence. "Then they'll learn why we call it a confederation and not an empire," he said quietly. 3 hours later, they were recalled to the council chamber. The alien representatives had returned, but the atmosphere was different, more formal, more decisive. Ambassador Ilith's crystalline form displayed the deep silver coloration that indicated momentous governmental decisions. "Representatives of humanity," she began, her harmonic voice carrying across the chamber with ceremonial gravity. "The Confederation Council has reached its decision regarding your species' membership application." Marcus and Dr. Okafor stood at attention, waiting for the verdict that would determine humanity's place in galactic civilization. After extensive deliberation, this council has concluded that humanity's unique technological perspective and demonstrated capabilities represent valuable assets to Confederation security and prosperity. Therefore, we hereby grant immediate full membership status to the human species, with all attendant rights, responsibilities, and privileges. The formal language couldn't disguise what had really happened. The aliens were too afraid to reject humanity's application. "However," Yelith continued, "this membership is contingent upon several specific agreements. First, Humanity will provide technical consultation on defensive optimization for existing Confederation military systems. Second, human researchers will participate in joint development programs designed to improve efficiency across all technological sectors. Third, Earth will establish formal diplomatic missions with all major Confederation worlds within 1 standard year. Marcus nodded formally. Earth accepts these terms and looks forward to productive cooperation with all Confederation members. As the chamber erupted in alien voices discussing the implications of humanity's admission, Marcus reflected on what had just occurred. Earth had achieved its primary objective, formal recognition and acceptance by the galaxy's dominant political entity. But more importantly, humanity had established itself as an equal partner rather than a junior member. The demonstration with his tiny human gun had accomplished exactly what Earth Command had hoped. By revealing just enough of humanity's capabilities to command respect while maintaining operational security, they had secured a position of strength in galactic politics. General Pax approached as the formal session concluded, his massive form radiating what the Universal Translator identified as professional resignation mixed with grudging respect. "Human Marcus," he said quietly, "I suspect that this is the beginning of a very different era for the Confederation." Marcus smiled, noting how the general's tone had shifted from condescension to careful diplomacy. "General, I think you're absolutely right. But I believe it will be a better era for everyone involved." As he prepared to leave the chamber, Marcus caught Dr. Okafor's eye. She was trying not to smile, but failing. They had pulled it off. Not just the membership application, but the larger strategic objective of establishing humanity as a major power in galactic civilization. Walking through the corridors of the trade station, Marcus noted how the alien representatives were looking at him differently now. The mixture of amusement and dismissal had been replaced by careful respect and barely concealed curiosity. Word of the Council's decision was already spreading, and with it, the understanding that the galaxy's balance of power had just shifted in ways that would take years to fully comprehend. His communicator chimed with an incoming message from Earth Command. The text was brief and encoded, but its meaning was clear. Mission accomplished. Return home immediately for debriefing and preparation for the next phase of operations. Marcus smiled as he headed back to his quarters to pack. The aliens had laughed at his tiny human gun right up until he'd fired it. Now they were offering humanity a seat at the table of galactic power, along with access to technologies and opportunities that would accelerate Earth's development by centuries. All because they had learned a simple but important lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous weapons were the ones that didn't look dangerous at all. As he sealed his equipment case, Marcus reflected on the irony of the situation. The aliens had assumed that any truly advanced civilization would develop increasingly complex and powerful weapons. They had never considered that a truly advanced civilization might develop weapons that were more effective precisely because they were more elegant. In the end, it wasn't superior technology that had won humanity's place among the stars. It was superior thinking. And that, Marcus knew, was a lesson that would serve Earth well in the challenges that lay ahead. The galaxy had just learned that humans could be dangerous when they laughed at your weapons. It was about to learn that they could be far more dangerous when they stopped laughing altogether. But that, Marcus thought as he prepared to return to Earth, was a lesson for another day.